Hello everybody and welcome back to the free online woodworking school where we aim to take your woodworking skills to the next level. In today's video, we're getting the drawer glue together. Let's get going. So just a quick one, in the last episode we got the drawer base fitted and I know some questions might arise, could you do this after it's assembled? And yes, you could. There's no reason why you couldn't get access to that groove and fit the base after this is all glued together. I'm doing it before, however, because it can be something that aids gluing up and getting it nice and square, as long as you get the drawer base tight on either side. If it's wobbling, it's not going to do much to keep this square. And if the drawer base isn't square because you haven't been using your shooting board properly, then that's also not going to help with squaring up the drawer. So again, the importance of keeping everything square, keeping track of your face sides and face edges, and then you can actually use that square base to your advantage here, or rectangle base to your advantage. But before doing anything on this drawer, we need to give it some pre-sanding because the insides of this are minging at the moment. And so sand those, and then we're also going to pre-finish them as well with a special finish that I've specially chosen for the inside of drawers, and then we'll get applying the glue. And so standard pre-sanding practice here. Get it all nice and smooth on the internal faces and keep sanding on the actual joints themselves, both on the tails and the pins, that is, to an absolute minimum. If you do too much there, you're going to start opening gaps. You may end up rounding the end grain and it will look disgusting. So be very careful to stop your sanding at those marking gauge lines. I'm going to go through 3 grits, 120, 180 and 240, and then we'll get doing the finish. Right, so they're all sanded to 240 grit, and what is the magic finish, you may ask? Where is it? Lemon oil. Lemon oil. Now this stuff is quite unusual in that it's a very non-durable, low build finish. You don't get a protective layer from it whatsoever. It simply smells really nice, which is why I love using it. In fact, I made a stitching pony recently for a bit of leather work that I'm messing around with. And the stitching pony was made out of cedar, and the combination of cedar with this just smells fantastic. It is such a nice aroma, and it's in my bedroom at the moment as well, so the whole room smells great. But yeah, it's not very durable. It doesn't make the timber particularly contrasty, although, you know, we're putting it on walnut. You'll struggle to find a finish that doesn't do that to walnut, so it will make somewhat of a difference, of course, but it won't be exactly the same as like your linseed oils or your tung oils or your Danish oil whatsoever. I just like it purely for the aroma, and it's just another thing that tickles your senses when you interact with the cabinet. And you don't have to use it, of course, like you could just use one of the other finishes I just listed, but if you're interested in trying something different, I'd recommend giving it a go. It's really nice. So because it's quite thin, I'm going to put it on quite heavy to start with, leave it to sit for a little bit, and then we'll buff off the excess. You might as well finish the base on both sides as well, because the corners will be a little bit difficult to access after the drawers glued together. So chuck it on now. That is good stuff, good stuff. So, next job is to do a dry fit with this, get all the clamps on it. We're going to go 2 side to side and then 2 front to back as well to close up all these gaps at the front and the back. Check it for squareness, check nothing's going to get in our way when we're doing the actual glue up. Take it all off, take it apart, chuck on glue, glue it together, Bob's your uncle, off we go. So I like using these lightweight parallel jaw clamps for drawers like this. Their low weight just makes them ideal for applications like this where you don't want any big bar clamps distorting the actual drawer. And because of the way we've set the shoulder lines on these dovetails, we can actually just put these clamps straight on it without any blocks or faffing around with anything like that. I'll explain why in a little bit. Right, we're going to use a pair of pinching sticks here to check if it is square or not. You may remember this from the Dovetail box project. There's no point in getting a square in here to see if the sides are square because these sides, under the pressure of the clamps, are currently bowing at the moment. In fact, you might even be able to see it on the back. This one is bowing quite significantly. And so trying to check that for being square is like trying to put a banana up against another banana and checking it for square. It's not going to happen and you're not going to get an accurate measurement. So you need to measure the diagonals instead. You could try and get a ruler in there, but these clamps will make that quite difficult to do so. And so pinching sticks like this are ideal. You simply get a point on either end that is less than 90 degrees. So we've got one here as well. You pop it in there, corner to corner, make sure to press them in quite firmly, and then draw a line across them. We then flip it round to do the other corner to corner, and with any luck, those lines line up. And so that is ever so slightly off. Let's see. So this side is a little bit too long. It's going beyond that other line. And so whichever diagonal is too long, in this case, this one, we need to angle the clamps towards that longer corner. But because this is such a minuscule amount, it's ever so slightly. So just to reiterate, that was the longer diagonal. And so I'm going to start by just shifting these top two, maybe even just one of them, towards that longer angle. So we'll keep the back planted here and literally just spin that round that way a bit. Tighten it up. Same with this one, just angle the back out ever so slightly. So now it's pushing more towards the longer diagonal. Get the pinching sticks in there. Okay, so it has shifted since my original line. That's good. Hey, good. So we know it's possible to get this drawer square again, and relatively easy so as well, which is always nice. And that's the beauty of a dry fit and why it is so essential in the process of drawer making, or in fact carcass making, furniture making in general. You know, when I put glue on this, it may not go as smoothly as that when getting it square and putting it together, but I know that it is possible, and that is half the battle. There's nothing worse than chucking glue on this, hoping that it is possible to get it square, and then throwing the towel in 30 minutes into the process, realizing that actually you can't get it square and your glue's dry. It's not a good position to find yourself in, so make sure you do this dry fit and make sure you treat it as if it is an actual glue up. In fact, time yourself as well. Make sure you can actually get it in the clamps within that drying window of the glue. And because this lemon oil isn't necessarily going to resist the finish as well as a wax finish will, I'm going to put some low tack masking tape on the inside faces of the drawer just to make it easier to pick out the glue afterwards, because we're going to be gluing this in place with the drawer bottom in, and so getting down into that bottom corner especially without scratching this soft cedar is quite important. And so before we start slapping glue on this, I wanted to quickly explain why in this instance we don't need to use gluing blocks. Those of you that did the Dovetail box project with me previously, you'll remember that we had to make specific gluing blocks to push those dovetails down into their sockets and make sure they properly seated in there. And now this is still a Dovetail box. Why is it any different? The reason is, because we made the tails sit proud of the sockets, when we put clamps on them, the clamps are going to be pushing directly onto the tails and pushing them down into the sockets. Whereas in the Dovetail box project, we intentionally made the pins sit a little bit proud, or, you know, they were flush, which meant that when you put the clamps on them, and I'm showing you an exaggerated example of it now, when you put the clamps on it, the only thing it was actually pushing was the end grain of the pins. Because the end grain from the pins was overhanging the tails, the clamp wasn't able to get in there and actually push the tails down into the sockets. And therefore we had to use blocks instead to fill out that dead space and allow the clamps to push down on the tails to seat them into the sockets. And so then the question arises, why do you even bother having the pin sitting proud when it's so much easier to have the tail sitting proud when it comes to clamping it? It's simply because it's so much easier to flush off a little bit of end grain here than it is to flush off an entire side. Yes, in this case, with regards to fitting the drawer, it's going to be easier and we can use it to our advantage, but with a box, flattening off all that afterwards is just a bit of a pain, and it's a lot easier to just cut across that end grain and be done with it. And so I'm going to be using a standard Type 1-2 for this because it's a relatively simple assembly. I don't need a lot of open time, and the colour it drives is a nice sort of medium between ash and walnut, so it can be advantageous in filling gaps. Not that there are any, of course. And I'm simply using just an offcut from the veneer that we used to space the door out previously. Right, and there you go, that's how you glue the drawer together. So a couple of key points, or a few key points to reiterate from this. Firstly, make sure you pre-sand the inside faces. Getting in there with sandpaper afterwards is going to be near enough impossible, especially those corners. So pre-sand all the way, make sure to avoid all the joints. As for pre-finishing the internal faces, I obviously opted for this, which is a lemon oil, very thin, very low build, not very durable whatsoever, but it smells good, and that's all I'm going for with this. This drawer's not really going to see a lot of use. In fact, it's primarily going to be used as a display at the school that I teach at. And so any extra things in here that may tickle the senses of prospective students is is what I'm going for. So that's why I chose lemon oil. But if you think this drawer is going to see a lot of use, then it might be worth going for a more durable finish. I'm going to be doing the rest of the drawer in Osmo, so you could just do the inside faces of that, or you know, the equivalent finish that you would use elsewhere in the cabinet. It's completely up to you. And as for the actual glue up, whether you do it with the base fitted or not, it's completely up to you. Just make sure whatever you do in the dry fit is exactly the same as what you do in the actual one. You don't want to be changing anything between that dry fit and the main glue up, because things can and probably will change without you knowing. And if you choose to do what I've done here, where you have the bottom in place, I would advise masking the internal corners. In fact, just mask them anyway if you've got it, because it'll be a lot easier to clean up that squeeze out. And other than that, just double check, triple check that it is actually square using these pinching sticks. Do not use a normal square for this, because you will be chasing your tail on every single corner until you get half an hour into the glue up, and then you realize the glue's dried and you can't take it apart. So pinching sticks are an absolute must. So in the next episode, we will be planing this flush and getting it fitted within the carcass. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do not forget to press the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and you can move on to that next lesson by clicking on the button below. I'll see you there.